Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. We talk about the importance of mentors a lot. I think because mentors have been so important, so influential in both of our lives.
Yeah.
But then we'll get messages from people that say that they're in an area, a context in their lives where friends are hard to find, mentors are hard to find. They feel like they're in some sort of people or influential, influencer Siberia. So then they go, how do we find them? How do we find a mentor? How do we find somebody who will help take us to the next level? And I think that's a valid concern. It took me a long time to find mentors myself. And so I understand how difficult it is to actually find people in your life that will help get you to the next level. So what we want to talk about on today's podcast is finding mentors when mentors are hard to find. How do you identify and locate people who will have a positive and uplifting influence on your life and your personal development journey?
Yeah, if you're a new listener, 2 episodes ago, we talked about dating, understanding how to date using personality typology. Should you date a particular type of personality? And we talked about as you do personal growth, we ended up into a personal growth discussion there. And we said, as you begin to grow yourself, the pool of people that are willing to go as far as you're willing to go starts to diminish the further you go down that road of personal growth. And so this applies to mentors and the people in your life that can mentor you. When you're starting out, there's probably more mentors available to you than as you go down your journey of personal growth, because someone that mentors you, they have to almost be beyond where you're at to help pull you to that place where they are. And so as you grow, the people that are willing to push themselves further and further and further starts to get smaller, just like in the dating world or just like the friendship world or any people world where you want to hook up and connect with people and talk with them and interact with them in personal growth, that thing gets smaller and smaller. So how do you find mentors in your life when you are feeling isolated, you're feeling alone, you're feeling like, you're, like you said, kind of in Siberia? How do you do this? And I think we have some ideas for you today. I call it asynchronous mentorship, and we'll unpack what that means. But I think that's a key idea that you can use in your life as someone who wants to grow and also have people pour into your life and help you move on to the next level.
So asynchronous means out of time.
Yeah.
Just like when you synchronize things, you make them happen at the same time. Asynchronous means that it's happening outside of time. And so the asynchronous mentors that come up for you are generally people that you are not talking to or interacting with in real time. They're not people that you are sitting down with or having phone calls with or conversations with. They're people who you may never get the opportunity to meet because maybe they're dead. Maybe they haven't been alive for a very long time. Asynchronous mentors are people or mentorships that you can collect that don't require somebody to be physically in your location or even in the same timeline as you are in life. So obviously we're talking about people whose ideas and concepts have been bound through time. And we're talking about seeking mentors where you can read their words, listen to their videos, listen to their audios, and watch how they lived their life, read biographies about them, experience aspects of them that you can model yourself after and embody what they did, or even just listen to their words and take from them their insights for yourself.
So as we talk about this, there's a book that I recommend everybody reads. It's from Napoleon Hill. It's a classic called Think and Grow Rich. And in this book, he talks about different mental principles, ways of thinking, ways of aligning your mindset to attract wealth into your life. So it's a really interesting wealth development book. If you're interested in business or wealth development or, that woo-woo stuff sometimes we talk about, like manifesting or things like that in your life, an excellent book for that. But there's one chapter where he talks about building a mastermind in your own head. And he talks about how in your imagination, inside of your own mind, you have the ability to, in your imagination, interact with anybody you want to. So you can simulate, you could literally sit down at a table or sit down on couches in a lounge with whoever you want, past, present, or imagined future if you'd like, and ask them questions and see what they would say back to you in your own imagination. Now that sounds kind of weird at first when you hear it. I'm reading this book as a 17-year-old, I'm like, wow, that is just weird. That's just crazy stuff. But in my life, I've seen this come up for me. I have almost this mental image or imagination of different people who have been alive, are alive now, and even some characters I've constructed that I'll have little imagination conversations with in my head, and we'll have a discussion, like a mastermind discussion around certain things in my life that I'm interested in going for or I'm having a challenge around. And it's really interesting to see how my unconscious mind uses this construct, this imaginary construct, to interact with those people. Now that's fed with the content that those people bring. I didn't just imagine like Galileo in my head, or I didn't imagine like Steve Jobs in my head without knowing a little bit about what they bring to the table. But it's an ability for me to, because I've read like the biography of Steve Jobs, for example, and he's one of the people that's kind of in my imagination I can go and ask questions to. This is kind of weird stuff, right? If you're listening, you're like, what is this guy talking about? Talking to people in his head? Yes, I have voices in my head, but it's all imagination. I know I'm constructing it, but I had to feed my mind with a certain principles, the biography of some of these people. And then when I have a problem or challenge, I can consult that mastermind in my imagination. It's all in my imagination, obviously, but it really does help me figure things out, align with things, and understand things going forward. So this is kind of how this can be used. Let's talk about some of the ways maybe we access this, but that's just one basic way you could construct a mastermind inside your own head.
I think Christianity really tapped into this with the What Would Jesus Do movement. It was this idea of having a voice in your head, a guiding voice that would help you vet situations. It would help you determine what the best course of action for yourself was, because you'd put it through the filter of your relationship to the person or the, however you want to describe it. However you have come to understand the evaluative criteria that Jesus would be bringing, you would be using the same evaluative criteria. I've always called that the voice in your head. And I think a lot of us have a voice in our head. And oftentimes it goes back to a really influential key player in your childhood. Sometimes the voice in people's heads is their father or their mother. In my case, it was my older brother. He was like 9 years older than me. In a lot of ways, he was the person who helped raise me the most. And so whenever I would do anything, probably up into my late teens, I would say, maybe even early 20s, the first thing I would ask myself is, how would Ty see this situation? And so I think most of us are not unfamiliar with this principle. We're quite familiar with it. What we've done is we've constructed maybe not a perfect representation of that individual, but the representation of that individual as we see them. And so they become a mentor for us. They're like a voice in our head that help us determine the right course of action, or, how would they see it? Now, what's interesting is that you want to make sure that the voice in your head, or the quote unquote voices in your head, are healthy ones. They're the right ones, that the mentors, because you probably have mentors in your life, you just don't realize that they're mentors. Anybody who is a voice in your head officially qualifies as a mentor. And when I've had mentors of all different walks of life. I've had mentors that were younger than me. I've had mentors that didn't exist in the same time period that I exist. I've had mentors that I realized that Robert Anton Wilson, who is a major mentor in my head, whenever I'm going through a situation, he's one, quote unquote, one of the voices that I listen to. And I discovered him the same year he died. And so I grieved the loss of him. I'd never met him. He died the same year that I discovered some of his books. And so I wept for his passing, even though I had just discovered his existence, because he was such an important mentor of mine. So mentors don't have to necessarily be a certain image. They're not necessarily a certain thing. What qualifies as a mentor is somebody that you've officially added to your mental lexicon. Their words, their wisdom, how you perceive what they bring to the world. If that's something that's like banging around in your head, floating around in your head, and you recall it in a situation where you're trying to create, trying to determine the best course of action, that person is officially a mentor. Now, if you don't have any of those voices in your head, you don't have anybody who makes up your mastermind, right? Your brain's mastermind, then you probably need a mentor. And it's not to say that you lose your autonomy. This is not to say that you hand your power over to these imaginary parts of you. It's not to say that you can't take a course of action that you think that one of your mental mentors would disapprove of. You can do whatever you want to. It's not to indicate that they are somehow a substitute for your inner wisdom or your best course of, the thing that you believe is the best course of action. But while you're ruminating over your life's decisions, as you're being thoughtful in how you're going to go about things, they become some of the counsel that you seek. Even though it's just in your head, they're still the counsel that you seek. You can determine whatever course of action you want to. You are the king or queen of your own destiny, of your own life. But think of these as the counsel people that surround you. And so when you're seeking some counsel, when you're seeking maybe a source of wisdom that you may or may not feel like you have at this time, then you seek out their words. You do it through the things that they wrote. And again, like, one of the voices in my head is Russell Ackoff, who is a systems thinker or businessman. He taught business strategy and systems thinking. And I'm not really all that into business, to be frank. I mean, you're way more into business than I am. But he's still a mentor of mine because he was the first person who really helped me understand systems thinking. So whenever I'm trying to figure out, basically a new way of engaging with the world or what I'm going to be doing, I'll go watch a bunch of Russell Ackoff videos on YouTube. They're all very old. He died a while back. None of the quality is that great. And yet, sometimes he's not talking about anything that relates to the problem or the challenge that I'm dealing with, but just listening to how he thinks will give me some guidance and some direction on the course of action that I should be taking.
I think it's interesting you made the point that it's not just the content of what he says or what he has said or written or talked about, but it's the way he approaches ideas. It's the way he thinks about things. I want to just pause for a second and say, I think we all have voices in our heads. I think we all have this either informal or formal mastermind that we consult, whether we do it knowingly or not, intentionally or not. And so I think what we're talking about here is intentionally choosing the voices and the people and the ideas that we'll be influenced by, that we're going to listen to and engage with in our imagination. So, when I first said it's a little weird, I'm talking about talking to voices in my head. I think you do this too. If you're listening, this is something you're doing. You probably have somebody's voice, whether it's your friends, maybe a parent, a family member, maybe it is a mentor that you've chosen to stick in there, or it's maybe a religious figure, somebody that you've grown up reading or studying about that's really rattling in that head of yours. Knowingly or unknowingly, you have voices that you are engaged with and listening to, whether you like it or not. So I think what we're really talking about in this podcast is taking control of that process. Remember, we're all about empowerment here at Personality Hacker and finding ways to take more power and control and empowerment for ourselves. And this is a big piece of that. It's about feeling empowered to construct the voices that you want to engage with in your head. And I would say, just to go back to what you just said, so the thought of how Russell Ackoff thinks is interesting, because for me, and I think this comes down to types. Let's just touch on type here for a moment. For me, as an ENFP, my technically called cognitive function, or how I make decisions in my life, is technically called introverted feeling. We've nicknamed it authenticity. It's about how things resonate with me, my core values. A lot of that comes down to embodiment. I don't really, when I'm making a decision, I obviously have a logic to it. I'll have a rationale to why I make a decision. That rationale comes from an embodied place. So I'm embodying an essence of something. So oftentimes my mentors come through not in the content or even the way they think. I guess it is a little bit how they think, but it's how they showed up in life. I love biographies, for example. One of the biggest life-changing biographies I've ever read was Richard Branson's Losing My Virginity. It set me off on a course of personal development that I could not have predicted pre-reading that book. And seeing Richard Branson in a mentorship role in my mind's eye. I've never met him in real life yet. And I see him as a mentor, not in what he says necessarily, or even how he built his businesses, more about how he embodies his life and shows up to the world. And so I'm watching for a lot of how people move with energy, how they show up and express themselves. And for me, that's how I see mentors. And in my mind, my imagination, I'm interacting, and the voices in my head are much more embodied voices. They're much more like the energy I bring to something. And probably for you, Antonia, as you use the cognitive function in your personality, technically called introverted thinking. We've nicknamed it accuracy. It probably is more about how the mental processes, like how someone gets to a conclusion about something logically. Like you're watching how this idea relates to this idea, relates to this idea. So when you watch Russell Ackoff, it's not about embodying how he showed up energetically. It may not even be about the content, the specific, this is what this thing is, but it's about how he got to the conclusion about this is what this thing is. So you approach it a little differently. The voices in your head, because of your type, show up different for you in your little mental mastermind.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think that probably for TJs, people who use extroverted thinking, they're probably going to look for mentors that have established that they know how to make something happen. People who have actually made something happen in the outside world.
Follow formulas and ideas of how things played out.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, okay, that thing worked clearly, so I'm going to follow this person, or at least ask for, guidance through their work, right? Like reading how they accomplished something, reading how they went about something, and emulate the strategies that they employed in order to make that thing happen. And I would imagine that FJs who use extroverted feeling probably emulate how people made each other feel. Like the permission to get your needs met, the permission to get other people's needs met, and to create simpatico and harmony. Who were the people who created the most overall harmony in the world? And those are most likely to be the strongest. Those are most likely to be the strongest mentors and the people in their mind. Now, that doesn't mean that your mentors are going to be the same personality type as you are. In fact, I would say that I can't think of a single mentor in my mind that is an ENTP. I've got people like Simone de Beauvoir on my list that create my internal mastermind, and Russell Ackoff, and I've got Eben Pagan up there.
About what's his name? The guy who was part of the Manhattan Project.
Oh, Richard Feynman.
Richard Feynman, thank you.
You know what's crazy is, as much as I love Richard Feynman, he doesn't make it into the mastermind.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why. I love Feynman. I do, and I love watching his videos. I love listening to how he thought as well. I think maybe there's a sense of redundancy there. Like, I don't feel like I have as many lessons to learn from Feynman. I mean,
maybe that's why there's no ENTPs in your mastermind, so to speak.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I feel like there's a lot to learn from him if you want to learn about physics, and especially quantum physics. He was the great teacher about that. And so when I'm interested and I want to learn more information around physics, I definitely look up his videos and listen to him talk. And he's got such a way about him. But as far as making it into the mastermind, he just doesn't. I just don't think about him. And I would say that the majority of the people who make it into my mastermind are INTPs and INTJs generally. And I bet that's not uncommon. I bet that when you create a mental mastermind, you've got people of different personality types, different from yours, that end up creating your internal boardroom, so to speak.
I would say I have a lot of INFPs and probably INFJs in my mental mastermind. Now that you mentioned it, which were INFs, so it's kind of interesting that they help me get in touch with that internal process for me, because my growth state is an introverted process. So
that makes sense. I don't know if there's any formula to introduce to other people to determine what would make a good mastermind, like internal mastermind for them. I would say though that if everybody in your internal mastermind is your same personality type, you might want to branch out.
Yeah. I think what it is for me, and I don't know how formal you are with this. Like, have you ever had, like, I've actually gone into meditative experiences. I put music into my ears, like some binaural beats or like a trance type music, and I've sat, on the floor cross-legged, and I've gotten really present in almost a meditative space, and then I've consulted in a formal way my mastermind at times in my life. Now, it's not a regular discipline for me, but I have done this. Do you have formality around kind of the people that you, and I also have like informal, voice in your head type stuff, and that's more regular, but like, have you ever had an intentional session with your mastermind in your imagination?
I have not. I would say for me, it's more when I'm really super into a subject. I'm really deep diving and trying to figure out all of the components of this, how this thing works. And I think I do this a lot just in activities. I'm at a point right now where trying to figure out the system of everything and all of the different components and what are the leverage points in getting us on a better trajectory as humanity occupies my mental real estate most of the time. That is what I'm thinking about most of the time. And when I'm reading things, I'm trying to figure out more nodes in the system. And when I'm learning things, I'm trying to figure out, like, if I see a clear dark patch in my learning, that is the thing that I go look for next. I realized I'd never read the Constitution before. And when that information struck me, I immediately went out and bought a copy of the Constitution, and I listened to all these YouTube videos on reading the Constitution and like breaking them down. And then I watched a series on, I think he was either a high school teacher or a professor that has this great series of YouTube videos that breaks down the Constitution, and he doesn't put any meaning to it. Like, he's like, okay, so this one is possibly by design vague, and so we can have conversation around it. And he's like,
you're talking about the founding documents of the United States. The
yes,
Constitution.
sorry, the Constitution of the United States. I apologize. I guess we have a global audience, and I'm like thinking way too myopically. Yes, the United States Constitution. I'd never actually read it. And here's the country that I live in and was born and raised in. So I should probably know that piece of information. And once I get gobbled up a bunch of information around that, then now I'm trying to think of it in terms of ecology and how it plays into a bigger ecology. And then now how does that play into like a social component? And what is the purpose of the Constitution? And are we honoring it? And where are we, is it time to move on from it? Are we at a point where we can graduate from it? And what are the components that we would keep? And so through all of this, as I was doing that, I was watching a ton of systems thinking videos that have nothing to do with the Constitution. But I was going through, and it was almost like I was doing a one-to-one. As I would watch a video on the Constitution, I would then go watch a video done by somebody like Russell Ackoff. And I would just pick up his manner of thinking. I would listen to how he thought in systems, and then I would go back to listening to about information about the Constitution. So it wasn't like a meditative space for me. It was more like I guess I don't know if I would say it's formality, but it's more of a strategy for learning. When I'm learning, when I'm deep diving into anything, I'll pick up pieces of information, and then I'll go consult the way in which I want to experience that information. And I'll go back and forth. Sometimes I do the same thing with Don Beck's Spiral Dynamics series. I'm listening to pieces of information around something around race relations, which is really interesting to me right now. Right now, I'm like thinking, I'm like everybody right now, I guess, thinking massively around race relations. And I'm also thinking about ways to, like, what are the leverage points? What can we do? Like, what are the kinds of memes that we need to be putting out there? Are the memes that are currently out there the right memes? And as I'm listening to different pieces of information and taking in new pieces of information, then I go back and listen to a portion of the audio series from Don Beck, or I'll go back and read portions of Spiral Dynamics, just so that I'm in the right frame for learning this information. So I don't know if that's formal, but that's my strategy.
I found sometimes, so we're talking about mentors that are asynchronous for you. Wherever you are in the world, you can access mentorship through books, audio, video, watching, YouTube videos online. You could even have an actual real live coaching call with a mentor possibly. But you're mostly absorbing information and the way people think and act and behave and do things via media. So it's asynchronous. It's not in real time. And I almost wonder, like, so you have this way of consulting your mentors, quote unquote, like Russell Ackoff, while you're learning something new, because it gets you back thinking. I think I do something similar. When I'm working on something, I'll pull different disciplines. Like I might watch a lot of videos from somebody I really like on YouTube that talks about like mind wiring or aligning. Like for me right now, I'm doing a lot of work around like aligning emotions and figuring out how I can model emotional control and manipulation and things for myself. So eventually someday, hopefully I can teach this to other people. So I'm working a lot on how can I get myself in certain states, manifesting states of emotion, things of this nature. So I'm watching a lot of that, or I'm like really diving into some of that. But then I'm watching videos, just about like achievement things, but they tie into how someone thinks about this. I'm weaving things together, which I think is an interesting point, is with asynchronous mentors, it allows you to construct a curriculum for yourself in a way that you can not construct when you're dealing with one mentor. Let's say we wanted to study meditation, and we went to some meditation retreat, and there was a guru there, someone that taught meditation. We're learning from one person, and we're at that retreat. We're in real time, and that's really great because you get to deep dive, but you get it from that perspective of the teacher there, the mentor there, and that can be powerful, very powerful. I don't want to discount that. What's interesting about you in your place right now, you're listening and you're going, I don't have live mentors in my life. They're talking about this idea of asynchronous mentorship. That really appeals to me because I live in the middle of nowhere. I don't have a lot of people that think like I do around me, let alone think advanced than me. Like I feel like I'm one of the most advanced thinkers around. How do I find a mentorship? Well, this is exciting. This asynchronous idea, Joel and Antonia, that lights me up. And what I think is great about that is you can begin to weave and construct mentorship for yourself that will lead you down a path to get what you want in life, or to be who you want in life, or to, have the things and do the things that you feel will be the most expressive part of you. And that's exciting. Now, I think there's probably some challenges with this, though. Because you don't have a person to give you live feedback, you are the arbiter of all the feedback you have. So you might be doing things and you don't have a calibration for someone to say, well, you're not really going to learn it that way because you're going to take 10 times longer because you're doing what that person on the video said. And by my experience, let me give you a little technique here, or like a twist on this that'll help accelerate your feedback loop so you know how to continually adjust yourself. So you have the challenge with feedback loops. And that's going to be something that I think is a challenge with this asynchronous mentorship. But it's a great place to start, a great place if you have nothing else right now and you don't know, where do I reach out to get someone that can really mentor me, help me go wherever I want to go, whatever that is for you, healing, achievement, transcendence, whatever that thing is. That asynchronous construction can really be powerful as a starting place.
Yeah, I would say that feedback piece is probably the most problematic. You've mentioned before that that's a major piece of what mentors bring, is that they bring feedback when
calibration. Yeah,
exactly. However, I think this is why it's so important to implement and not just think. Like, you've got to take your concepts and ideas out to the real world and see how they pan out, because the world fundamentally becomes your feedback mechanism. You test, iterate in the real world. So regardless of whether or not you're an introvert or an extrovert, extroverts have a tendency to more be implementers, and the thing that they need to wrestle with is being more thoughtful. And introverts have a tendency to be more thoughtful, and the area that they need to work on is implementation. Just not a rule, but just a tendency to go those directions. And I think this is one of the reasons why implementation becomes so important if you're a person who has a tendency to simply want to think and plan and strategize in your mind. So as you have these mentors that are asynchronous and you take in a bunch of information, you let the world be your feedback loop. Let the world be your feedback mechanism. Make sure you're implementing as you're trying, so your calibration happens in real time. Whatever it is you're trying to implement, whether you're trying to make something happen or whether or not you're trying to persuade other people of information, whether or not you're simply trying to talk to other people and contextualize it in a way that they can understand, whether you're trying to get other people's needs met or whether or not you're trying to show up as a more authentic you. Allow yourself to be sensitive, allow your own body and mind be the instrument that allows you to know whether or not you're hitting it dead on, whether or not you're getting closer and closer, recalibrating to getting closer to your goal. So the only point that I really want to reiterate on this podcast about having asynchronous mentors is this idea that you probably have them in your mind already. You have people whose thoughts and modalities and belief structures and ways of navigating the world are already inside your mind. We can't help but outsource a portion of our thinking to other people. It just happens. It's part of the brainwashing that is called culturalization. Like, if we're not brainwashed, we become feral. So as we become, learn language, and as we understand how the world works, and as we get feedback on how society will be okay with us behaving and not behaving, we adopt these voices from the outside that become part of our thought process. And unfortunately, they become very unconscious parts of us. We don't even necessarily really recognize that there are voices in our head anymore. We call this process our decisions. We call them our decisions. That's my decision. I made that decision. And most of the time, it's actually the sum total of all of the pieces of advice you've been given throughout your life from other people that actually crafted the decision you ended up making. And so you already have these voices inside of you, regardless of whether or not you're aware of them. So in this concept of asynchronous mentorship, what we're really talking about is be aware of the voices that are already inside of you and ask yourself if those are the mentors you want. Are those the voices inside you that you want to have inside you? And can you add more variety, more wisdom to your internal boardroom, your internal mastermind? Can you add new voices in that are voices of wisdom, people who really figured out something that was really important for you to figure out? And then can you incorporate them in a more conscious way into your mental diet? Can you, as you mentioned, Joel, when you're trying to embody something, you'll go look to how other people embodied the same concepts and then try to emulate their embodiment. Whereas what I do is I try to get a sense of how somebody thinks about things. And then when I'm learning new information, recontextualize it to a new style of thinking. So however you end up doing this process, be thoughtful about it. Conscientiously inject these aspects of yourself or these aspects of mentorship into your mental diet. Maybe make I have a strategy. Joel has a meditative routine. They're basically the same thing. They're just two different ways of going about the same end game. So figure out a way to make it a part of your decision-making process, or figure out how to incorporate it so that you're not without mentors. You are simply using asynchronous mentors.
Yeah, and also guard the gates of your mind. This is one thing that I think is really powerful. I'm going to out you here. One of your guilty pleasures, Antonia, is every once in a while we'll watch some episodes of The Voice. It's a show here in America about a singing competition.
Yeah, you don't have to be gentle about it. I actually refer to The Voice very frequently.
You do. I just want to make sure,
on the podcast, and I do that because it's the only show that I watch.
I have insecurity about reality TV because I feel like people, if you admit to anyone you watch any kind of reality television, they instantly judge you. So I'm like, all right, well,
you lose credibility.
But no one's listening to this podcast, luckily, so that's good. But still, The Voice, right? So these are 4 judges, famous judges, American musicians. I think they're all American that judge people, and I think a lot of countries have these singing competitions. Every time now I hear someone sing, because I've watched enough. I don't watch this faithfully, but I've watched enough clips. I've watched enough of The Voice, the show, that I'm instantly have the 4 judges in my head. I'm listening to music now through how they would interpret the sounds and the way it sounds and things of this nature. Almost they become mentors when I look at music. So I think you've got this little mentor group in your head probably that you construct as a person. It's focused on the activity that's happening. It's focused on the data that's happening. So what this means is you probably have things you're unaware of. You've constructed little mentorship panels or masterminds in your head around certain topics, around certain things you may not be aware of. So guarding the gates of your mind, what are you feeding your mind with? What narratives are you listening to other people talk about in certain genres, certain topics that you unconsciously are letting their voice be very influential in how you think? It's not like don't allow other people's voices to be influential. It's just know that that's probably happening. And I just realized this as this conversation was going. I think I vet music, the way people sing, through the 4 judges on The Voice. Is that fair to judge music just by those 4 voices? They are professional musicians. They have a lot of good things to say because they are producers and musicians themselves. They probably know what they're talking about. If that was the only way I was seeing things through their lens, that's limiting on that. So I would caution that we guard the gates of our mind. Find out where are you looking at things through others' eyes, where is the influence coming from? And just, again, that empowerment idea, taking control and empowerment over your own life and realizing this is happening to all of us. Where can I take more influence in this?
I don't think it's a guilty pleasure. I've come to embrace all pleasure.
Yeah.
If it's pleasure, I don't want to think of it as guilty. I want if I like The Voice, I like The Voice. That's just how it is. That's how I roll.
Yeah, and I could get over this insecurity. I don't watch much television, but I just got to get over. I just got to get over the insecurity of.
Are you manufacturing this insecurity in?
No, I really don't like to say this on the podcast. Honestly, it's not manufactured at all. Because I'm just assuming people are well, this guy was whatever. Because I think what it is. What it is. I think that's something I got to work on. I probably secretly judge people when they watch reality TV.
Oh.
So this is my FI. This is my introverted feeling part of me. Is I'm probably judgmental on other people. I'm like, oh, they're not very smart. They watch reality TV. So I just won't say anything to anybody so they won't judge me about how not smart I am.
Right.
So I probably judge other people. That's probably why I'm insecure about it, because it's a thing that I'm struggling with in my own heart and my own mind around.
I think the word struggle might be overstating it a bit.
Maybe.
I don't think this is a struggle.
Have you seen reality TV? Have you seen a show around the Kardashians? Have you ever seen a clip of any of these shows and gone dear God, what in the world? How did this get produced?
There's a lot of train wrecks out there. But if somebody is authentically feeling that this is... Well, okay, never mind. You're right. I do judge some people.
See? You know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But I would love to be on a reality TV show myself. I want cameras following around all day. That'd be fantastic. But weirdly enough, so I have this weird relationship with it.
You do.
I gotta get counseling and therapy around this.
Okay.
To some degree. Anyway, what do you think? You've been hearing this conversation around mentorship, voices in your head, creating a mastermind, mentorship. How do you approach this? Have you thought about this? Is this something you've consciously taken control of in your life? Is this something that's a brand new concept for you? You're like, yeah, I do have all these voices in my head, and maybe I should be more conscious about when I listen to them, who I listen to, maybe create a formal ritual or approach to actually talking to this imaginary group of people and how they think or act or whatever. What is your experience with this? We want to hear from you. You can leave a comment or ask a question. And I'd love to hear your story around this. If you have a story, right under this podcast on personalityhacker.com is a great place to leave feedback. Also, you can join us, our community of like minds. It's growing every day, of people that think about personal growth, understanding themselves in order to empower themselves and become better versions so we can change the world together. You can find that community over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling particularly giving, you can leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It really helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We will talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.